One. Welcome to a very special conversation, a podcast that has been a long time coming, part of an ongoing conversation with my chaverim who I'm inviting to talk with today, DJ Shabbat and Josh Nankin. And before I explain who they are and why they're here with me, a little bit of a background of what we're doing here. We are coming up upon the holiday of Purim. And for many, this is a very festive day. It's a day of reyos, of achva, of getting along with each other, of gifting gifts, of matanas levyonim. It's also a day in which, for many, there's a lot of drinking, and there's many different opinions out there in the poskim as to whether this is optimal, suboptimal, or some compromise between the two. And this is not a halachic discussion for now. That's a shiur for another time. But rather, what that represents to many in the community, a holiday that is so suffused with drinking, is one that is both triggering and possibly very dangerous for certain individuals and for family members and friends. And part of the goal of today is to raise awareness and to create a lifeline for those needs. The role that alcohol and substances play in Jewish history is a complex one. One in which is fraught with all sorts of problems from the earliest time, whether it's the fact that Chazal identify the grape and therefore wine as one of the four possible fruits that Adam and Chava tasted of, and therefore is commingled with the original chet of Adam Harishon, or the story of Noach. And Noach gets off of the teva, and the first thing that we're told that happens to him is he plants a vineyard, and then as if it took an instant to grow enough wine, to grow enough grapes that it could produce wine and become an intoxicating source. He becomes intoxicated, embarrassed, possibly assaulted. And this is all sort of tied into the story of grief that occurs to Noach. And then we have the story of Lot and what happens to him when he's intoxicated. And so certainly while wine plays an important role in our rituals, Kiddush and Havdalah and Purim, Pesach night, it also has severe challenges that come along with it. And the Jewish community is certainly not immune to these challenges and these problems. And Baruch Hashem, we're at a point now where the world is waking up to the reality and ready to confront in the mirror the face of addiction, to deal with it not from a place of shame and sort of the conversation we have behind the scenes. And that's what really provoked and brought about this conversation today. DJ Shabbat and Josh Nankin are both members of our community, and they're both involved in and passionate about the recovery Chevra, and we'll let them talk about what that is in a moment. And DJ is a CABC. He's an addiction and alcohol and other counselor, and has a story of his own of how he came to get involved in that important work. As well as Josh, who is not only a dear Chevra, a dear friend and a part of one of my chaverim and a member of the shul, but he is also someone who has an incredible recovery story of his own, incredible story of resilience and of learning to help others as well. And we're going to learn and share a little bit of that today. And so what I want to do is introduce maybe first DJ. You'll tell us a little bit about your background and your story and how you came to be involved in addiction work, and what are your goals with the Jewish community? So, Bechavod, DJ, welcome.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, Josh. Thanks for having me. I think for me, the story of how I got here is really we have to start at the beginning. For me, I remember somewhere around 10 years old, I remember actually taking my first drink. I forgot to also say, by the way, my name is DJ and I'm an alcoholic. And that's where I got my passion from.
Hi, DJ.
Thanks, Josh. Was this idea of, how to help people like me. So when I had to finally admit that I had a problem and that I needed to get help. So again, we have to go back to the beginning of where that came from. So I remember even as a young kid, for a long time, I really didn't feel connected. I didn't feel a part of. I always felt like I was apart from, like I was a little bit different. I was a little bit of an outcast. I was a little bit, whatever it was, I never really felt comfortable in my own skin. And I remember that the people that I looked up to in my shul, the people that I thought of as role models that were the really cool people, the people I wanted to be like, were they were drinking, right? And now I want to make sure it's important that I say I don't remember at the time if they were getting completely, drunk and inebriated the way, I did. But these were the people that I looked up to, and these were the things that I thought was okay. And the things that as a young man growing up, I thought meant that I was an adult.
Now you
So
looked up to them because they were cool, they were older than you, or they were having a good time. What was it about that?
yeah, they looked like they were cool. They were the cool people in Shoal. They were with it. Yeah, they were having a good time also. That was for sure a part of it. But like for me, coming from the background that I was in of being, very um almost in a bubble, so to speak, of my religious adherence. Like I don't come from a broken family. I don't have any, issues in my life that I would anything traumatic that I would consider that, but and yet I still ended up as someone that had a problem. And so I had to try and, like I was saying, I go back and think of these times retrospectively, and try and think what led to that. So like one of them was this idea of that those were the people that were cool, those were the people that fit in, and those were the people that I wanted to be like. And when I turned 13, the first beer that I ever remember actually stealing on purpose was 2 weeks before my bar mitzvah. It was at my friend's bar mitzvah. We were at a hotel for the whole Shabbos, and like that was the cool thing to do. Everyone was looking, that was what all the guys wanted to do was to try and get some alcohol. And I remember that when I drank that first time, I finally felt like I fit in, right? Like I finally felt a part of this group of the cool people, the people that were with it, right? The accepted among my peers. And even when I think back to then, again, from this angle, not from the angle of a 13-year-old, I can see how much more I was probably drinking than my friends. I remember being at Kins actually, and as a 13-year-old in Shul, you're not exactly kept away from the alcohol, right? Like, oh, can you make kiddush for this person? So can you make
I'm
kiddush
pretty
for that
sure they've
person?
they've tightened up their policy since then. But just because you made
Okay.
mention, but
Okay, so let me say that in my youth, it wasn't as policed
right,
as hopefully it is now.
right.
To the point where like I was able to have four, five, six shots, right? And I remember being in competitions with my friend, like, hey Neil, I've had four shots. How many have you had? And he'd be like zero, and I'd be like, ah, loser, right? And be like, hey Maishi, how many shots have you had? I've had seven, and he'd be like zero. So again, like thinking back, I was probably drinking more than the rest of the people, but like to me, that was my way of fitting in. And as that progressed for me, we know that this disease of addiction is a progressive disease. It gets worse and worse and worse. Um, this had become a coping mechanism for me that I wouldn't even realize until much, much later in life when it became so my drinking came so out of hand because it was a coping skill to deal with all the other issues that was happening in my life.
Right.
So um so again, we would go to high school. In high school, whenever there was a party, I was always the one drinking. We were always making sure that I had alcohol, however it was. As I got older, again, it became the thing that I was known for. Right, we'd always make sure that there was beer or bourbon in the house because that's what
It was
DJ
part of
likes
your
to do.
identity. You were the guy who had a drink with you.
Right, exactly. It became how I identified myself, and therefore it became how people identified me. To the point where even like whenever show I would go into, I would always look to see where the drinkers were, right? I would always look to see who's the kiddish club or who's wherever because like that was the group that I associated with.
Right.
That was who my people were.
Now, to be perfectly honest, DJ, you were a member of our shul before you moved back to Rogers Park, and uh, I do remember seeing you sort of in the back sometimes, but it wasn't. There were times that you sort of disappeared. I hope we weren't complicit in creating the drinking as a habit here.
So let me say your divrei Torah are awesome, but I also hate speeches. So it really is not a reflection on you. It was really of the atmosphere that I wanted to live in and the crowd that I wanted to be around was that making it okay to start drinking on a 10 a.m. on Shabbos morning,
Right.
right? And for me, one of the things I like to make a joke about is that candy gets the kids to come to shul, alcohol gets the adults to come to shul, right? And that was certainly true for me. Part of the reason why I moved into the neighborhood in Skokie and started enjoying your shul was because a lot of the people that I was friends with were the heavy drinkers, let's say, of the shul, not necessarily problem drinkers, but like that was how we all identified ourselves. And I wanted to be
Let me
around
ask
and
you a
hanging out
question.
with them.
DJ, you distinguished just now between people, heavy drinkers and problem drinkers. What does that mean? Is everyone who drinks a lot an alcoholic? What's the difference between someone who has a problem and someone who doesn't have a problem?
So it's a very interesting question, and it's a very, very small line of distinction. And I usually challenge it this way. First of all, the DSM-5, which is what we have to diagnose all these types of issues and disorders, from alcohol use disorder to schizophrenia, and gives us a criteria of what constitutes this disease. Based on their metrics, a person that has more than 5 drinks, more than 4 times in a month, is considered a problem drinker. It's considered to have a substance use disorder. The way that I really, anecdotally distinguish it is what's the drinking causing you to do? And has your life become unmanageable because of it? So
Uh,
if you're someone that goes to shul every Shabbos and you have a couple of shots, but you don't get drunk, you're not losing sleep, um, you're not recreationally losing any of your social obligations or anything like that because you're drinking too much, you're probably okay. Now, if you're someone that's, getting drunk every Shabbos, forget the everyday drinker. If you're someone that's getting drunk every Shabbos, Friday night, Shabbos, and you're missing lunch because of it, and you're not going to shul, and you're, maybe maybe making a fool of yourself, missing social obligations. Right now, it's affecting your life. It's affecting everything else that you're doing. And if you're unable to stop, then it becomes from problem drinker, from from misuse of alcohol to alcohol abuse.
And sometimes though it's you have to kind of one of the hardest parts is having that self-awareness and self-honesty to know like my life actually is unmanageable because that's not always clear to people even when it's told to them like
And
Josh,
and
how? Sorry, go
and
ahead.
and again, just using my story as an example, like I never had a DUI, I never lost a job, never cheated on my wife, right? I wasn't fighting, like Rabbi Gelman, you said, I was just the quiet guy in the back of the room, right? And it was very difficult for anyone to distinguish that I actually had a drinking problem.
I had no idea, and rabbis are supposed to know. And after I found out, obviously I felt guilty, but there was no conversation. We didn't know, and probably a stigma that used to exist around addiction. It used to be that that I think many of the addictions that we deal with today were classified sort of as just mental illness. We would sort of lock you up and don't not deal with it, and at very best not talk about it. And that I think contributes to part of the problem.
And I think that again, bringing up the idea and really cementing the fact that this is a disease. This is not a moral issue. This is not, just stop drinking, right? This
Right.
this is something that we can get into in a little bit, how it rewires our brain to crave the substance, whatever the substance or whatever the really activity is when we're talking about, all sorts of different kinds of addiction, to crave that in a manner that trumps and supersedes all other things in life. And to again give a part of my story, when I went into rehab, when I went to withdrawal management, I was 112 pounds. And if you think I'm skinny now, that was 40 pounds ago, right? And part of the reason why that happened is because I was drinking to so much that in the morning I was puking because I had to get rid of some of the stuff that was in my system. And my brain on this disease decided that the way to solve this issue was not to stop drinking, but was instead to only have soup because soup, when you puke that, it's liquid. It comes up a lot easier.
As
So
soon as you would
again,
accept it, you would accept it. A normal mode of existence would be eating and then vomiting up. That's just what you do.
right. It actually rewired my brain to make drinking more important than eating,
That's
which is what we really call the insanity of the addiction.
right. Before we move into some of the next step of how the Recovery Chevra formed, Josh, do you want to share maybe your perspective on how addiction took hold of your life, how you got into it initially?
Yeah, and that's a great segue into what you just said, how we got formed. So for me, my story like technically started in high school. I went to yeshiva. I mean, it was close to my house, but you know, most of the guys there, if not all the guys, were boarding there, and I mean, there was a strong drinking culture in the school, even though it wasn't wildly talked about. And it became, for a lot of the guys, like a coping mechanism. There wasn't a lot of stuff to do, and this is kind of a way they passed the time. But that's not really where, as you know, I call it, my drinking career began. You know, when you talk about addiction or alcoholism, there must be, it's like Bena Shmashos. There's a time where you weren't, and then the next second you were, and it's always difficult to figure out what that point in time was. But then I went to Israel, and the drinking age there was 18. And although I didn't want to admit it, and it's funny, DJ, as you're saying all these things, it sounds so much like what I went through, which is like, you know, feeling like I'm part of a group and feeling okay. You know, I have this substance which makes me feel okay being around people and the circumstances that I'm in. Here I am in a different country in Israel, and learning for me, you know, I'm a Baal Tshuva, and it wasn't, you know, something I was used to and doing all day long. So here's this thing that makes it easier. And, you know, part of it is we were 18, 20 years old, and this is what kids did at our age. But for me, I didn't know it, but it was making my life easier. I was able to cope because I had alcohol. And then as time progressed, I went into college. Same thing. I had, you know, a lot of test anxiety, and then, you know, this again just became my best friend. But I didn't know what role it was taking in my day-to-day life. I just thought it was just like, you know, something people did. And then one day I realized like I became dependent on it. And towards the end, where right before I started becoming sober, you know, things really started coming off the rails. But as I said, you know, well, I'm considering myself like a functioning alcoholic, which people I've heard in meetings say functioning alcoholic is like someone who drives 300 miles an hour down the highway and hasn't gotten in an accident yet. Still not safe, but you know,
So
you're not
nothing in
on
your life,
paper.
nothing in your life has gone off kilter as a result of it. But you,
Okay, like the last year before I became sober, I got in a car accident, and it shook me up. And it's like, oh my gosh, this is real. And I had plenty of times before that where I really got inebriated to the point where other people started to notice because of different things that happened in my life. And they would say like, hey, I think you might have a problem. But I kept it together for so long outside of those times that people are like, I guess he's got it figured out. He just, I don't know, a couple times he went off the rails. But when I had that accident, it's like, oh no, I really got a problem. And I even told some people in my family, like, I think I have a drinking problem. And they even said, like, okay, so you know, you'll figure it out. You just got to cut back. That they had seen me at my worst and still thought that I could, you know, keep a handle on it.
yeah.
So I did a
It's
couple things.
interesting
I
that
went
they
to
that unfamiliar with addiction family members just dismissed it, and they felt it was something you could sweep under the rug and something that doesn't require too much alarm or attention.
right. And I mean, in the other parts of my life, I was very successful. So it's like, you know, Josh can do anything, but Josh could not do this by himself. He needed help. So I tried to I went to an AA meeting, it happened to be a Jewish meeting. And my first experience with AA was not good. It was the wrong meeting for me, put it that way. There was a lot of like holding hands and, you know, kumbaya kind of stuff. And the big book was new to me, and it kind of felt like a cult. The big book is the main book of Alcoholics Anonymous that people, you know, the addicts consider like their Bible. That's why they call it the big book. So it was all new to me, and I'm like, this is not for me. This is not an Orthodox Jewish experience for me. So I went back out. You know, I continued drinking, and then I got worse. And then I went actually to the Chapman Center, which is the addiction center in Evanston Hospital. And I sat down, and they give you a big long interview. First of all, they make you blow. They make you do a breathalyzer. And of course, I was at 0, so I was already feeling like, great. Hey, maybe I don't have a problem. But then this guy asked me, I don't know, half an hour worth of questions, and he goes out of the room and he goes to computer, puts it all in. I don't know. He comes back and goes, actually, you're a severe addict. And I'm like, oh, really? Who would have thought? And he tells me, you got to go through a 90-day treatment program, PHP, and it's 12 hours a day, and you have to do this for the next 90 days. And I said, I can't do that. I'm running a business. Actually, was working on selling my business at the time. What if the buyers figure out that I'm an alcoholic, and also I got to keep the company running all day long, so I can't do that. And he goes, well, I don't know why he decided to say this to me. It's probably the worst thing anybody in this line of work could have ever said. But he said, this is your only option. He said, if you don't do this, you're never going to recover. So I left that meeting at the Chapman Center, and I went drinking again. And I didn't know what to do. There was no place for me to go, and alcohol was my only way to get out of my problems, until eventually, God forbid, it ended in a divorce, and my life fell apart. And so I had to kind of figure out where I'm going to go from there. I didn't have a Chevra, a group of people that had gone through what I went through to tell me how to get out. And it's interesting because the day that my marriage started to go, where I had to leave my house, someone else in my family hooked me up with someone in AA, a friend of a friend, and she met. Her name was Katie. She met me at Starbucks, and she said, "Okay, this is what you're gonna do. I'm gonna point you into this direction. You're gonna go to these meetings. I have my brother who's also an alcoholic. He's gonna take you around to different meetings." And just based on that interaction of hearing someone who had gone through exactly what I went through and said, here is what works, that changed. I was ready. And that was my beginning of my recovery, and it's 4.5 years now, and I haven't had a single drink.
It took the type of person who knew how to communicate and knew how to relate to what you were going through, which I think, DJ, this brings us to, I think, a good question. Maybe which part of where does your story
cover, which is why it's a perfect segue. That's why I wanted to mention that. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So
can I just jump in real quickly before
absolutely.
You ask Rabbi Gelman? I think Josh also elucidated a really important point, which is just because it seems like everything else in your life is going great doesn't mean you don't have a problem with alcohol or another substance. In the same way that I was very functional running my own business, basically, until I wasn't. Right. And I knew there was a point when I had a problem and I just couldn't stop. And anything that gave me an excuse to keep going would keep going. So sorry, Rabbi, go ahead.
No, so that's this is all very helpful, and I commend both of you for courage to share this. I know it probably wasn't always this easy, and now when you're in a better place, it probably has become something you can handle and deliver with more clarity. But this brings us, I guess, to having shared your experiences. And DJ, I'm interested in your path, because you've kind of done a 180. You go from being sort of a slave to the substance to being not just someone who conquers it every day and struggles with it, but now someone who actually is trying to help others. And I know that's true to the whole AA dictum and what it's all about. That the ultimate test beyond the 12th step is really to try to then help other people, is sort of to preach the gospel, if you will. But I want to hear about that transition in your life. When does that take place?
Sure. And actually, Josh kind of touched on it also when he was talking before. So I knew the year I got sober, I told my wife I needed to go get sober on Simchas Torah. And I knew probably before Rosh Hashanah that I knew I couldn't stop and I needed help. But I, like Josh also mentioned, I had responsibilities. I said, what can I do? There was no hope. I can't stop. I have to wait till after Yomim Tovim. And so I basically spent 2 straight months drunk, where I'd fake going to work in the morning. or I'd go for a half hour and they'd think I was there, and then I'd be on the road working the whole rest of the time, and I'd be sitting in my car drinking. And what I remember the night that I told my wife that I needed to get help, first of all, she cried because she was very happy that I was finally doing it. And then I cried because I felt like a complete loser. And I made a big show of pouring out all the alcohol in my house, aside from a couple of beers that, I had to hide away because I couldn't stop, right?
Very important to hold on to it, right?
Yeah, they were in the garage, and I remember even thinking at that point, like, oh my God, like this, I just made a whole show and I still can't stop. Anyways, there's a person in our community that I knew was sober, and that person was already a couple of years sober. And, my wife was and I were a little bit concerned. What are people going to say when they find out you're an alcoholic? And I say, well, what if they say the same thing about this guy, which is only all these awesome things about how great he's become? And I literally got to see the transition of this specific person from really into the disease to completely sober. I saw his eyes clear up. I saw him start to become more present. I saw him start to become more involved, healthy, all this stuff that like I really never had exposure to before. So when I came home, this was the guy that actually took me to my first meetings in Chicago. And I spoke with him a little bit and I said, I said, what we really need to help Jews, and specifically Jews in Chicago, is we need more role models, more people to stand up so that people can identify that guy is sober and I want to be like him, just like I had. Because again, I didn't feel well enough to go talk to the rabbi. I didn't know anything, who to talk to. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what meetings to go to. I didn't know anything about anything. All I knew is I needed help. And it took me 3 days to get help, which is very, very dangerous because one of two things could happen. Either I would stop drinking, which can cause medical issues based on the amount that I was drinking every day. So I needed to be medically monitored while I was going through withdrawal, or I could have decided, I don't really have a problem, right? Which is the cunning, baffling, powerful part of the addiction. And I would have decided I don't need help in the end. I'm fine and
By the way,
continue the
you
way
just
I
said,
am.
if I could interrupt you, just said something very important that I don't think a lot of people are aware of. Um, Alcohol, people think is a very mild substance, very mild drug. It's one of the most powerful, most dangerous of all
Yeah.
substances, and one of the most difficult to wean off of properly. And I would say up there, correct me if I'm wrong, with heroin in terms of it's the danger of trying to get off of it.
It's much, much worse. Alcohol is the only one you can die from. Heroin, you're going to feel like you have the flu for times 1,000 for 2 days, but you're going to be fine after that. With alcohol,
You're
you
saying
can literally,
from the
the
withdrawal,
withdrawal, the withdrawal from alcohol,
because heroin
if
kills
you're not
people,
medically monitored, can kill you. Yes.
right?
You can go into DTs, which are shakes and seizures. Your heart pressure can go way up and get a heart attack. There's so many things that can happen. Withdrawal from alcohol is the worst type of withdrawal there is.
Right. So we usually think of drugs and substances as overdose is the extreme, which is maybe easier to overdose on certain extreme drugs, but the withdrawal process in alcohol, you're saying, is far more severe.
It's far more dangerous. Far more
Uh,
dangerous.
so that's not known. I don't think a lot of people are aware of that. Outside of, and I'm studying now marriage and family therapy, a master's program, but it's something we learn about now. But honestly, it's not something that was known to me beforehand, and I've been dealing with the Jewish community for a while.
Yeah. And so getting back to what your question was, I decided at that time that if no one else was going to stand up and be that role model, then it was going to be me. Not because I think I'm special, not because I want the notoriety, but because I wanted to really recover loudly to help other people from dying quietly. And so at that point, I changed careers. I dedicated my life and my time to training and learning how to help other addicts and alcoholics.
Wow.
And honestly, for me, it was I didn't even know what to do. I called the person that was in charge of my sober living. I said, "How do I get involved?" And he said, "You have to go become a counselor." And so I went back to school and spent 2.5 years obtaining my CADC, which is Certified Alcohol and Drug Counseling. And then spent the last, since about 2018, 2017, working in the field at various treatment centers outside of the community, working from the full gamut from detox, withdrawal management to aftercare, um, to everything in between. And then I went back and I got my graduate license, my master's, and so I'm now a licensed practical counselor. And this is what brings us to the beginning of Recovery Chevra, is that we wanted to provide a place for guys like Josh, for guys like me, for guys that didn't know where to go, a place very informal, very easy, nice and slow. Come and talk to us. We'll bring you through it. We've been there. We know exactly what it feels like. We understand it. In addiction, we have this term called terminal uniqueness, which is the idea that you don't know what I'm going through because you haven't experienced it. If you had my life, you would drink too. And what Josh said before of going to a meeting and hearing someone else say the exact same your story from their mouth is a really, really powerful message. And it's a powerful hope of, gives hope to the hopeless of there is a solution. You don't have to live this way anymore.
That's really empowering, really incredible.
Yeah. And really just
and it's not so scary anymore because these are people in our community. I mean, initially I would avoid going to Jewish meetings because I felt that as Jews were a little bit more judgmental, and it was easier to go to a church basement or to even people up in Highland Park. There's a lot of places up there where everybody's Jewish, but nobody's religious, and they're not judging you because they're going through the same thing. But now here we have something, we have from people wearing kippahs who are also going through the same stuff. And it kind of takes the stigma out of it, knowing that there's people even more like you that have gone through hell and can come back from it.
What you're describing, Josh, is kind of ironic because we ascribe to the belief that we believe in tshuva, in change, in repentance, in growth. We read Musar Sfarim, Sifrei Chasidus, about changing your life for the better, about constantly being a better person the next day than you were previously, and being B'nai Aliyah, and yet people have often reported to me, both in the world of addiction as well as elsewhere, that they feel that their Jewish community, for whatever reason, seems to suffocate them at times and seems to be judgmental and seems to be staring at them. And I wonder if this is if this is something we have to look at, sort of changing that mentality whole scale. Is that people walking into the shul for the first time, people walking into schools for the first time, if the first thing they're thinking is, "Wow, how am I being judged? How is someone thinking about me?" And that's an important work, both for the individual trying to change, to know that it shouldn't matter, and for the institutions that we are building to create a different, more embracing, more loving and accepting environment.
I think the thing to that point, I just want to say, one of the first things, when I first went to AA, there was nobody religious there. And I walked in with like the superiority that I know all about God because I'm a religious person. And when someone told me after my first meeting, he goes, religion is for people that don't want to go to hell, but spirituality is for people who've been there. And there's a large emphasis, I feel like in our communities of we do this many mitzvos and this many averos, and that defines us as a person, but there's no connection with God. And, if you read Rabbi Shei's Todd's book, The You God of Our Understanding, which is a great book, even if you just read the first chapter, he talks about how addiction is not just a physical problem because, once the physical chemical dependency is gone, you still have the mental side of it. You still have the emotional side of it. So it's not even emotional or moral or mental dependency. It's a spiritual dependency. You need some sort of connection with God to really solve this problem. And that's not always widely found, unfortunately, in our day-to-day modern Orthodox or Orthodox lifestyle.
Right.
And I think that would be a huge game changer, focusing more on the spiritual side of our community versus just the religious side.
Right. And many of our best and brightest have now embraced things like Hasidus and Breslov in particular. Breslov seems to be this refuge for recovering addicts. I find that this is something that's interesting, and much of the writing in Reb Nachman's writing deals with this idea of the need to have a place to recover and the need to grow. And something else in Hasidus that DJ reminded me of is that Rav Tzadok Hakon of Lublin, in his work Resisei Laila, talks about over and over again the theme that sometimes your Achilles heel, your worst midah, your absolute, the thing that represents your pitfall in life, the thing that causes you to collapse and fail every time, if you run away from it, you'll never reach shleimut, you'll never reach your completion and your mission in this world. Whereas if you recognize that, concretize it, transmute that for the good, you will find your purpose. So you left your job, DJ, and you became basically a new kind of addict, an addict who's someone who's going to take that demon and help yourself and help other people recover, pull them out of the pit as well. And that's exactly what Rav Tzadok talks about. He talks about taking your worst traits and now making it your best and making it your greatest, most marketable attributes.
And which brings me to something I also want to point out that's important, is to understand that recovery is not just stopping drinking. The process of recovery is really a journey of self-discovery and self-growth. And to say what my worst midah was as a manager of people was really that I cared too much. And I was always a failure as a manager because of the way I would always understand where my employee was coming from, and I'd give him a day off or whatever, or I'd pay him, and like this thought that I couldn't be, quote unquote, cold-blooded. And through this process of recovery and self-discovery and the journey, I learned that that's not my biggest strength, my biggest weakness. It's actually my greatest strength. This ability to connect with people and to show people that they are important to me and that I care about them is the way that I'm able to help people the most. The first time I went to an AA meeting and everyone was like, "I love you," I didn't even know what to do. You mentioned also another important thing that we as Jews are very, very into and know is to be important is the idea of community and fellowship. And those of us that feel like we're apart from the community, right, that feel ostracized because of stigma or because of whatever, it creates a hole in our neshama. It creates a hole that we can't understand how to really practically heal until we start to learn how to make that connection with other things. That's why AA is and all these other programs of recovery, they're not religious programs. They're spiritual programs. They talk about the idea of connecting to Hashem, right? The idea exactly of Chassidus and it's amazing. It's amazing how many times when I've run a group and I've quoted Rashi and Mishnah and Torah and all these concepts that we learned growing up, but we don't always necessarily are able to integrate them in the correct way.
Now you're making the connections. Now you're seeing that your halacha was also spiritual. Your Torah was spirituality. Now you're drawing those connections.
I never understood bitachon until I became sober.
Right.
I never understood it.
Faith, for those listening, faith in God and reliance upon Hashem.
I never understood faith, acceptance, integrity, humility. All these concepts are all spiritual concepts. Honesty. I didn't understand them. I knew them.
Humility, especially. Humility is a big one.
Humility is a big one.
So it's interesting you mentioned is ego.
You mentioned humility and ego, Josh, and I'm thinking about this. And if you look at the Rambam in the Laws of Tshuva, he says one of the essential building blocks, one of the prerequisites for tshuva, for repentance, is to feel shame. Now, there's a lot of literature on shame, good shame, bad shame, guilt versus shame, etc. Right, Brene Brown, but what he's talking about is not the bad shame, not you should be ashamed of yourself, but rather shame that I have to be humble enough to recognize that I have a problem, humble enough to recognize that I need help. And actually, it's the most enriching and empowering feeling when you turn to someone and say, "I need help." It's like taking a load of bricks off of your shoulders and say, "Wow, I don't have to carry this myself. I have a Chevra. I have people who can pull me out." And that's an amazing thing.
And that's what the God of AA is talking about. It's not necessarily talking about whatever God you grew up understanding. It's to get you to understand that you are not God. Right? You need to sit back. You don't control everything. You need to sit back and ask for help.
So that's an interesting point. And I want to move to maybe that question is, so you have to ask for help. So let's say someone has a family member, right? Someone has a sibling, a child suffering with addiction. Maybe they recognize it, maybe they don't, but you realize their life is falling apart. They're not functioning. They need this substance. What can I do? Can I push someone into rehab? Can I force them to get help? Can I drag them to a meeting? Can I shame them? What am I supposed to do if there's someone else I'm reaching out to, right? Who can help them?
So this is a very delicate issue. It really is. And the truth is, like you said before, until someone's willing to admit that there is a problem, that they need help, they will not ask for it. They will not get it. And there's nothing that you can do until they understand that they have a problem. Um, as a family member and like a spouse or whatever, the biggest thing that you can do is there's these meetings called Al-Anon that are for the family, is learn how to protect yourself and your children. And it's an unfortunate case, and I've had to tell this to parents, and it's sad and it's hard, but we are very pain motivated. And I call it the dentist method, right? I don't go to the dentist until my tooth hurts so much that I really need to go, right? And so the same idea is that if I don't feel like I have a problem, this disease is going to resent anyone asking me or suggesting that I do. It's the
Wow.
only time I've ever sworn at my wife when she mentioned that I might have a problem, and I cursed her out. The only time in 16 years, 17 years that I swore at her was when she challenged that maybe I have a drinking problem, and I was drunk at the time.
Right. I won't ask you what you said, but this idea that family is part of the process, this Al-Anon is revolutionary to a certain extent. Obviously, it goes back years. I think 1950s or so,
Mm-hmm.
right? But it's revolutionary that I don't have the problem. Why should I have to get help for someone else I happen to know? That's like a big chiddush,
I'll
right?
give you a good anecdote for that as well. And that's because as we change, right, our spouses learn who we are again. I remember my wife saying to me as I was getting sober, as I was getting into recovery, she's like, "You're suddenly like communicating with me and like telling me your feelings. I don't know who you are." Like, right? Like I literally a whole new person.
It's wonderful.
And part of that journey, part of what we go through is to also help inspire others by example.
Right.
Because recovery isn't just for addicts. Anyone should work a program. It's a journey of learning who you are and learning how to you can best help the world. That's what humility is not what I can get out of things, is what can I do to help someone else.
Right. So this systems theory that I'm learning a little bit about in school now actually says that, it's not just this one person who's the problematic individual in the family, the person we stigmatize and the person we point the finger at and scold and put in the corner with a dunce cap, but rather everyone is part of a system. And we are all, as Josh was saying, reacting or coping with something in our lives. And it's not about blame necessarily, or wrong or right, but the reality is that our decisions and our cognitions and our emotions are often the product of a whole cyclical set of relationships. And so when one person in that system wants to make a change, everyone in that system's equilibrium is thrown off. And then we all have to now readjust and learn to be new human beings. And I think we model for each other. I'm going to change. You're going to change. She's going to change. And that's part of the process. The whole family, the whole community, as a result, is uplifted. And so I think this idea that you're looking to create, that you're creating with a chevra, means this is not just a chevra for the people themselves who are isolated, but a chevra where the whole community, as a result, is transformed. And that's, it's really ambitious. Josh, are there any things that a family member should say, should do, should not do, should stay away from? What are some thoughts, maybe things that you've seen along the way that helped you or didn't help you?
Yeah, and after this, maybe DJ, you want to talk about like more tactically exactly how recovery cover works. We've been talking about like the name,
Right.
but like it's kind of in the ether. Yeah, so telling somebody to just fix it, like just get better, it's kind of like, I mean, it's Lahavdil. It's not the same. And no one should know from this, but like, it's like kind of like telling someone with cancer to just fix themselves. I feel
Right.
like a lot of times, and it's just not possible. That doesn't mean that they don't have responsibility for what they do. And when they go off the rails, like the pain they cause their family is real. And like, there's a step in the 12 steps where you have to make amends. So it's not like whatever you do, there's no repercussions. But at the same time, expecting somebody to just fix themselves without the proper hope,
Snap
without the
out of
proper
it.
help, and yeah, it's just not going to work. That's the first thing, and exactly what DJ said before, which is you can't force anyone to be better. All you can do is kind of guide them in the right direction, give them the information, present the help as much as you can, and unfortunately the rest is up to them. But putting them in contact with the right people, which is what it took for me. I mean, maybe I wasn't ready to get sober before I actually did, but what I know is that when I did start the process to get sober, even though it was a bottom, a real bottom for me. What worked for me was exactly what happened with the first AA, second AA, Bill W. and Dr. Bob, which is talking to somebody who went through what I went through and said, this is what worked for me, and I'll take my hand and I'll show you the rest of the way. That's what worked for me. It wasn't some magical drug or some crazy regimen or even doctors. I went to psychiatrists and psychologists, and we talked about my anxiety and my depression. It didn't cure me from my alcoholism. I mean, I believe you don't actually get cured from alcoholism. It's a disease you have the rest of your life. That's what I believe personally. But what helped was talking to someone who was in the trenches. So recognizing that, as opposed to like there's going to be some magic pill, there's going to be some magic, thing outside of that other person. That's what did it for me.
And I think another thing for the family is to understand, look, let's be real, right? It's hard loving someone that has a substance use disorder, right? We want to shake them and say, just stop. But if the family can understand that this is a disease that we're talking about, right? We get angry at the disease, we don't get angry at the person. And I remember when I came home from my month and a half in getting sober in California, I said to my wife, I go, listen, based on the numbers, I'm going to relapse. At some point, I'm going to return to use. It's just unavoidable. I said, if you come at me with anger instead of with love, you'll never reach me again. We have to treat sick people with love. It's hard, I understand. And this is why we have all other support groups to help us to get through that and to learn how to protect ourselves and our children. But if we go out there with anger, expecting that they can snap their fingers and change, it's just we're dealing with a disease here. You can't just, if you don't tell an asthmatic you have lungs, just breathe.
The addict is not bad. The addict is in pain. Is
Right.
trying to deal with something. Is coping.
Oh,
Right?
that is a huge one, by the way. That is a huge thing where, I mean, it's true that it's hard to say you see somebody partying all the time and you're assuming they're having a good time. But it is a chiddush to say that people who are doing this behavior all the time, it's not fun. I remember towards the end of my, before I got sober, I would stand outside of a liquor store and I would play the tape. That's what they tell you to do, play the tape of all the terrible things that are going to happen when I would drink. But I would think like, okay, I'm going to go get my half pint of liquor and my peanuts, which was one of my things back in the day, and I'll finish it. And like for at least the next hour, I'll be okay. But then my life's going to go to hell in a handbasket very quickly. And I would sit there at the liquor store and think that, and I would still go in and I would still buy the liquor, and everything that I thought in the tape was exactly what happened. And I couldn't, what am I going to do? I had to do it, even though I could see it happening.
Like I was saying, I was never at my lowest point as I was after I said I need help and I still couldn't stop.
You never not wanted it. So DJ, talk about the recovery Chevra. What are you doing practically? What are the goals? And how do we get in touch? How do we get help?
So the recovery Chevra is literally just it's a grassroots program. It's free of charge. There's no cost. We're just a bunch of guys and girls that have been through the program and are just interested in helping anybody else out. Like I said, we want to recover loudly to help other people from dying silently, and we want to make the transition from someone that identifies they have a problem to starting into the recovery program as seamless and as easy and as like I said, easy as possible. We've all had a buddy. We do better when we're going through something with a buddy because then we feel like there's someone that understands. Right? We always feel like, oh, if I don't want to go somewhere alone, but if I know someone that I'm going with, then we feel more comfortable doing it. So again, we are not Rabam, we are not the local Rav, We are the guys that are at your shul, that you probably see us every week and you don't even know that we go through this. We're your typical everyday average looking person. I might be extra handsome, but for the most part, like we're all average looking. We're not the guy on Skid Row, right? You didn't know I had a problem until I told you I had a problem.
Well,
So
yeah, to that point, some of us are public and some of us are not. But the point is that, you know, if the Rav or some family member is in a shul and is like, I have this problem, the Rabbanim should know that there's people in the shul that are part of the Chevra that they can introduce them.
and we keep your confidentiality. So like you can reach out anonymously. You don't have to share your name. You don't have to share an email address. We have a website called recoverychevra.org. Here I'm going to share the number that we have as well. You can email us.
866-320-4325, info@recoverychevra.org.
I don't know why it's backwards. Yeah. Maybe if I turn it this way.
No, it's forwards for us.
We got it.
But also, I just want to say also that we're not part of any specific like way of healing. This is just a feeder program, so we're not necessarily peddling AA or SMART or anything. We're just here as people that are just mentioning our experience.
And you each have your own experiences and things that work for you, and you can make referrals to friends as appropriate, because that's part of the Chevra, is to say you're not alone. You're part of the Jewish community and is struggling with alcoholism or any other addiction, and you have a place to go, and you have a Chevra to go to, and a place to plug in so that you can pull yourself out of your situation. And that really is the goal.
And again, just making the community of people that understand. Right, you can come. I can go to AA and talk about Kiddush and you know all the time. They don't know what I'm talking about. Right, to have a place where from people identify with from people.
People talk about stopping Kiddush clubs. What about let's start by making these flyers, putting them up in the walls, plastering the walls of the kitchens of shuls in the back rooms, those little closets where people are getting together during maftir, and saying, wait a minute, you got a problem. You know, when there are organizations that deal with Rahman al-Islam problem of domestic abuse, and they plaster the walls and the halls of the women's bathrooms in organizations with signage, right? And we have
so we do have magnets. We're doing this thing called the Roadshow, where we'd like to go around to different shuls and distribute our magnets. Just to this effort. So that's definitely where we're going next. We want to get around and make people understand that this is our mission, and that we're
going to be leaving these cards.
ATT is the first stop on our roadshow.
We're going to be leaving these cards in the shuls, and we're going to be encouraging. I heard a recent conversation that Rabbi Ephraim Goldberg in Boca had with a family, and there was a daughter of theirs that was in recovery for drug addiction, alcohol addiction. And one of the things he said stuck with me, and that was, when everyone leaves this program, I want everyone to grab a brochure. Everyone should grab a program. In other words, why? Because there are people, let's say it's 5% who are struggling, but they're only going to grab it if everyone takes one. So if you see it in the hallway, just pick it up, take it. And that way you'll encourage everybody to do the same thing, because there's someone's life is going to be improved if it becomes normative, it becomes normalized, if we remove the stigma and say we all deserve the right to belong, to be part of a chevra, and to begin to heal.
And just the last thing I just want to also mention is that we do have a regular Tuesday night meeting. It is mixed at this point. As we grow, we're going to hope to branch out to just men's, women, and just men's meetings, just women's meetings eventually as we grow. But right now we meet every Tuesday night at the Upward office, 3557 Peterson. Come in on Central Park. Every Tuesday night at 8 o'clock, the Recovery Chevra has a meeting. Even if you just have questions and want to talk, we're there.
Wonderful. And from my vantage point as a rabbi, I will say, I mean, people are welcome to disagree, but obviously the goal is to do it in a way that's most familiar for Jews, for religious Jews, that we should be able to be comfortable. And though right now there's a mixed meeting and eventually it's going to be separate, I have to say that if you're struggling, you don't start to ask questions of, how religious are the people I'm going with right now? Because right now it's emergency triage medicine. It's like a person is going into cardiac arrest, Rahman al-Islam. You don't start looking under the fingernails to see if they have dirt. Right now, we need to get people into this. And eventually, as this flowers and develops, and it will, because there's a need, we're going to be diversifying, expanding it, as you've just mentioned. I want to just mention one thing. Your work, which is really remarkable, and your story, which is admirable, reminds me of one of my most favorite works. It's a small pamphlet of Hasidus written by the author of the Eish Kodesh, and the Chovos HaTalmidim, Rav Plonmus Kalman Shapiro, Zatzal, Hashem Yinkom Damav, who was murdered in the Holocaust, and who wrote some of his works during the years in the Warsaw Ghetto. And one of those works was called B'nai Machshava Tova. It's a very thin volume. You could actually find it. There was a version translated, I think, in the 70s or early 80s. And B'nai Machshava Tova is basically designed to be a chevra of people who are working on themselves, who want to improve, whether it's a habit they want to change, whether it's an addiction, whether it's something like, it could be Bisman Azed, it didn't exist in his time, but it could be internet pornography, it could be substance, it could be just a bad trait. And he encourages Jews to get together, to talk about it openly, and to say, we are here to improve ourselves, to change our lives for the better. And we're going to create intentionally a group that is targeting that objective. The first thing he writes in his book is that when we leave Mitzrayim, we leave the lowest level of impurity. The Jewish people had to change their clothing and wear the clothing of Egyptians. And he wonders why. He says, because when you're trying to change, you need to have a place to go where nobody's going to be pointing a finger and blaming you and causing a stigma around you. And that's what the recovery, your work with the Recovery Chevra is about. It's that place to go. The other day, I was driving on the street, and there's this beautiful building. And it's on the corner of one street. And then I go to another street, and it's another gorgeous building. And it's a giant building that is dedicated to selling marijuana and other drug paraphernalia to people, which is now legal in almost every state in this country. And it's going to be legal everywhere soon. And these buildings are glorified and they're beautiful. And the Shulchan Aruch says the most beautiful building in the community should be the shul, should be the house of spirituality. Well, I think that one day your little meetings should be the most beautiful buildings in the community. A place not where people become addicted and hooked, but rather a place where people recover and grow and strengthen themselves. And that's my bracha to you. And I thank you for your time. And God willing, DJ and Josh, not only should you guys continue to be strong in your personal avodas Hashem, your personal journey with addiction, but also may we help other people out of that pit as well.
Amen.
Thank you. Amen.